Rising great powers are now in strategic competition with America. A new imperialism threatens. Middle powers must compete for interests and attention, knowing that if they're not at the table, they're on the menu. Indeed, the threats that Canada faces are multiplying. Hostile powers, including foreign governments and non-state actors, are transcending geography to threaten our sovereignty.
And what comes next, according to Prime Minister Carney, is Canada reaching its target of spending 2% of GDP on defense.
And we're going to do it by the 2030s. Oh, wait, we're doing it sooner?
This fiscal year, after years, decades even, of Canada being criticized for missing the mark. Now, the Prime Minister wants to spend an additional $9.3 billion, basically at warp speed. But where is that money going to come from? Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre would like to see it all in writing.
That's why we're calling on the government to bring in a budget, because all of this will require a budget. A budget that not only puts this money forward, clearly identifies where it comes from, but cuts waste in bureaucracy, consultants, foreign aid, corporate welfare, and other areas so that the necessary increase in the military does not come as an inflationary burden on the backs of our Canadian taxpayers.
I'm Catherine Cullen, host of CBC's The House.
I'm Daniel Thibeault, host of Radio-Canada's political show Les Coulisses du Pouvoir.
And I'm Jason Markusoff, producer and writer for CBC in Calgary.
And this is House Party, a weekly podcast diving into the big burning questions driving this new government. And this week we're asking, is this the right time for Canada's military spending spree? So this is a lot of money being spent very quickly. Is it the right time, Jason?
It gets a lot of other issues off our back. I think if we're hosting the G7 next week here, bring all the G7 leaders to Alberta here. And if we're going to be, talking about being leaders in the world, this was a big chip on our shoulders, a big knock against us, being one of the few laggards. I mean, it used to be that a lot of countries weren't meeting this target. A lot of the NATO countries weren't. But the world changed with Russia invading Ukraine, and other countries have changed much faster, and we haven't. It used to be just the U.S. criticizing Canada for doing this, and now other countries have joined that fray. And so we were kind of not, laughingstock, maybe a harsh term for it, but we were kind of the laggard within our coalition. And if we have this new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, talking about being leaders among the G7, among NATO, among our European allies, and we're still well behind the pack in terms of defense spending, it's almost like this couldn't stand.
It felt to me like it goes with the style of government that Mark Carney is coming in with. He wants to do everything quick. He wants to do everything bold. It needs to be fast. So big infrastructure, big this, big that, big military spending, right? And Jason is quite right. It's been an issue. I remember the first time Trudeau back in the days went to the White House and sat down in the infamous room with
the Oval Office,
with Donald Trump. And I think it was the second thing that Trump brought up was the military spending, the GDP, the percentage, and Trudeau looked not unsure, and I don't know, is it 1.3, 1.4? Do I calculate this and that? This puts that aside, right? So the G7 leader will come in. We have a plan. It's going to be done by this time, especially since the 2% is now, we're talking about 5. We're talking about people are throwing numbers much higher than 2. So the 2 seems to be a bit of a minimum. To be able to say, okay, we're going to go ahead with that. I think it's probably the right thing to do for Canada right now, especially, and we're talking about the G7. There's the NATO summit, right? The week after. And that's also a nice thing to have in your pocket when you show up at NATO saying, you know that thing that everyone wanted us to do? Well, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it by the end of fiscal. So that's probably a happy combination of all those reasons that explains why they wanted to go so quickly on that.
So it's in line with the Prime Minister's sort of branding of going big. It helps a little bit with the peer pressure from the other kids and the G7 and NATO. Maybe they
Don't
won't
neglect
pick
the
on
peer
us.
pressure. No, you don't want to be the kid in the corner.
Peer pressure has made me be the man who I am now, so don't jump on peer pressure.
Is that an advertisement, a warning? I don't know.
I'm not even sure.
But I think there are a couple questions we need to ask. Can we do it? I think is a pretty important question with Canada's military. So we want to go on this spending spree. The Prime Minister does. Can the Canadian government actually pull that off? And we can dig deeper into why there are questions about that. And then the other part of it that we do have to ask is, how are we going to pay for this? And one thing I do want to flag, there's been a lot of support across different well-known Canadians who have been calling for this, who are happy to see it. You hear Canada's allies are saying, all right, Canada's moving in the right direction. It is a lot of money. And I was actually listening to Mark Carney's press conference on my phone. I had him in my ears while I was walking through Ottawa's Byward Market yesterday. And there were people having mental health crises. There were people who were clearly dealing with like the drug overdose crisis. And those two things may not seem related, but I will say to you, these are choices we're making as a society, right? Mm-hmm. More than $9 billion additional dollars that we can put warp speed on. That money is not going other places. And I'm not saying that there is, $9 billion worth of need when it comes to the overdose crisis, but I'm just saying these are choices we are making, and we should think about the full framework of them as we make them.
That money isn't going other places, Catherine, but other money is. I mean, I think if this was the only big place that Mark Carney and the federal government was going to spend money, I think a lot of people have a lot of questions. Yeah. But it's not. He's talking about, a similar warp speed development in federally funded affordable housing. To your point about, mental health and addictions issues, a lot of other provinces certainly are really hitting the gas pedal on trying to spend on that. There's, the big infrastructure planning, and we're not sure how much of that the provincial infrastructure spending is going to be done with public money, how much can be private money. But we're hitting the gas pedal on a lot of things. So I think what this might be a bit of a paradigm shift for Canada. I mean, we heard Paul Liev talking earlier about, where's this going to come from? What are we going to cut otherwise than this? I think this could be the end of talking about balanced budgets as we know it. Because let's face it, those other countries that are hitting 2%, 3%, 4%, so few of them, unless you're like Norway with all your oil wealth. Yeah. You do not have a balanced budget. You have deficits. Other countries run deficits. Britain, France, Germany, U.S., which has a much more massive military. They spend, I'm not sure how much of their GDP on military. They have a gigantic deficit, and they're not talking anywhere seriously ever about hitting balanced budget. So I think that if we're doing this, and if we're going to do other things as well, it might be the end of balanced budget rhetoric. And those same business leaders and same conservatives who are talking about wanting to hit this target may have to find that something else gives in that.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's a typical Canadian discourse, right? The balanced budget. It's a thing that the Liberals under Paul Martin brought in. The structure was different back then, and the way to borrow was costing countries, especially Canada, much more than the structure we're with right now. So, and I had conversation for my show with economists who are actually thinking, we don't necessarily need to always reach for balanced budget as long as growth is higher than your level of spending. Just make sure that the economy grow at a faster pace, and you technically can sustain that. I'm not encouraging for that, but it will bring to that conversation, because the question that comes with all that, where does the money come from for spending on military and spending on it? Because he's spending on everything. So where does the money come from? We don't know yet because there's no budget, but the money needs to come from somewhere. And the last I checked, there was no surplus, and so I don't quite sure where he gets the $9 billion just for military, but he needs a whole lot of money for everything that he wants to do at a very, very short period of time. And that may lead to the conversation where do we really need to balance the budget?
So I do want to get back to defense spending in a second, but I think what's interesting about what you're talking about, Dan, and what you're talking about, Jason, is a question that fascinates me, which is how many people other than Mark Carney could pull off what Mark Carney is trying to do right now. But having the license from the Canadian public to spend a bunch of money, not really having a sense of how it's all going to play out. We have to wait months and months for the budget. I think Canadians are willing to let someone do that who has economic expertise. That because he had this CV, which was his selling point in the election, there is a certain tolerance for big spending. I don't think we know how big that tolerance is.
Yeah, because he kept saying during the campaign, I know economy. I know, I've been there, done that, managed crisis. I know my way around that stuff. And so everyone looks at him, okay, he knows. How long is it good for?
Yeah. This is an interesting question. When it comes to the money that is being spent, first let's just talk a little bit about what we're actually going to, what the government intends to do with that $9 billion. So the biggest chunk goes into recruitment, retention, and support of military personnel. This is interesting. This is paying members of the Canadian Armed Forces a better wage, right? So it's not, yes, it's recruitment, it's new people, but some of it is not muscling up. It's just like making the basic things work. And other pieces of this is a further $1 billion into military capability. Some of this is Arctic security, $2.1 billion for Canada's defense industry, $2 billion for diversifying defense partnerships. To me, one of the fascinating moments when Mark Carney announced this, some of this is like literally spare parts for pieces of equipment. And he said, he only said it in French, c'est gênant, but he said, it's a little embarrassing that we have 4 submarines and only one of them is seaworthy. We have vehicles that we literally cannot get the spare parts for, and therefore they are not, worthy of being out there on the battlefield.
They had that issue with the tank that they wanted to send to Ukraine. They sent a few, but they had to basically pick up parts from one tank to make the other one combat worthy. We don't have stocks. We don't have stocks of parts. We can't fix our own vehicle. So it is a little gênant. It's a little embarrassing, but
then the question becomes this bigger question, because this isn't the end of it. Mark Carney's made it clear, right? He's getting us to 2%. I think he said, in fact, it's like 2.1%, a little bit above 2%. But he wants to keep going with those big pieces of equipment, things that we're talking about, fighter jets, submarines, you name it. Can the Canadian government pull this off? Because we have literally decades of experience that suggest we're really bad at buying things. So what do you think the answer is, Dan?
We've done it in the past. Like we had moments during the Cold War, during Second World War. We were able to do it at some point. Can we do it? If he streamlined, and he said during the campaign that he wanted to streamline the purchasing, the procurement process with defense, it needs to be reviewed, obviously, because there's serious flaw somewhere in there. I was watching the auditor report on the F-35, and just the capacity of building a hangar to keep the plane here, that's an issue. Like, we're 3 years behind. We're going to get the planes. We're not going to have a garage to put them in at this point.
You just want to bang your head against the wall, eh, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, just that 1 in 4 submarines are seaworthy stat stunned me. He also said after that, Mark Carney did, less than half of our aquatic, marine vehicles and fleet operations fleet vehicles are operational. That's, this is catch-up. And you know what the amazing thing about this is? It's not like we've been like stuck at like where we've been in defense spending for the last decade. We're hitting at 2% this year. We're at 1.45% right now. A decade ago, when people really started ratcheting up this rhetoric, Canada was at 0.9% toward the end of the Harper years. So they've been ramping up defense spending under Trudeau. And they are at this point where, we're just having this big bump, and all we can do is operate the equipment that we have, not even bulk up. Like, I don't know what kind of more military, capacity improvements we're going to need for these F-35s, which are, as we heard from the Auditor General, way more expensive than we thought they were.
Another interesting piece of this moment and this question about this moment is the fact that there is more public support now. Opinion polls show this, right? That it's even in just the span of the last few months, it's grown. And I do keep thinking back to that moment where I believe it was the Washington Post had a story that behind closed doors, Justin Trudeau was telling his G7, G20, all his world leader buddies when the doors were closed, that Canada was just not going to do it. Like 2% was not going to happen. And after that, we did see a plan to get to 2%, although it was 2032. And then we've been sort of playing footsie with how quickly we could get there. But all of a sudden, bam, it's happening now. And I really am interested in this question of how much of this is about the moment versus Mark Carney's own personal, particular ambition? Because it's not just about, I mean, part of this is about pushing back against Trump, but it's also sort of his vision for the country.
It's a little bit of both, I think. It's the moment. It's Carney. It's the moment. It's the moment because it's the American threat. It's let's find ways to sever our ties with the U.S., try to make more stuff home.
Maybe not sever.
Not sever.
But I think that's too strong. Like, yeah,
limit
exactly.
or depends.
Or slowly back away and hope that no one notices.
Sever was a little bit of a strong way to. Yeah, I think we're still going to we're still going to do business with the U.S. Can we do less? Can we do more here? Mm-hmm. And I think that's one, you have to look at it through that as well. Can we increase our production capacity here in Canada? Can we build some of that stuff, those vehicles? We do some vehicles in London. We do some ammunition around Montreal. Can we do more? Can we increase the production? I'll be interested to see if we're talking about the Auditor General's report on the F-35, the cost increase that she noticed. Will that reignite the debate for a smaller F-35 fleet and maybe another plane, maybe the Gripen that could be that you can build under license, right? So you basically buy the right to build a plane. You go to Bombardier in Montreal and say, can you build me a fighter jet? Think of the jobs, the economic impact it would have around Montreal, the province, probably in Ontario as well. Is this a way to try to say, we can do more here and that can have a positive impact on the economy? I'm not saying we're going to go that way, but I think the debate's interesting.
The only thing I will say about that is that stuff doesn't happen quickly. Mark Carney wants to move quickly. You're going to figure out how to build a whole plane here. That takes time. But Jason?
Yeah, to go back to, how long have we been talking about replacing the F-35s, right? Do we go back to the drawing board of that, or do we go, if we're going to start something big on procurement, do we start with something like submarines or more icebreakers, which we'll need for, evolving Arctic. You talk about the opinion thing. I get the sense that the last year was the year that the dam broke on this issue. Because for the longest time, it was just some defense hawks talking about meeting the 2% target. And then Trump joined in, and then other people started to. And then we started to see other allies saying we are laggard. And then last year, we also started hearing the premiers talk about this, and the business groups talk about this. So everybody was really pushing at this public opinion on defense. So there was all these pressures coming to bear, and part of that was a lot of let's make nice with the U.S., which, and let's face it, as much as we dislike to say it, a lot of what's driving the legislative agenda and the announcement agenda of this government right now is what the U.S. wants from us. Look at that border security bill. Look at the privacy breaches that are alleged to be part of it. A lot of it is, as much as we're trying to stand up tall against or apart from the U.S., a lot of it is still trying to make nice with the U.S. And this was almost like one of the biggest sore points in the U.S. relationship. But because other people were also talking about it, it became something that the public was increasingly pushing on Canada to do. Were people asking for it right now? No. Poilievre was promising to go that fast. Does this sort of, end this phase of the conversation? Yeah. And then we get targets already talking about 3.5%, 5%. So we'll build up our military capacity to do more and spend more, and I guess we will.
A couple of interesting things. When you talk about the premiers pushing, maybe not leading the charge, but being a big part of the charge on this, Wab Kinew, NDP Premier of Manitoba, is actually perhaps the leading voice of all Canada's premiers on this. This is something that he has really been talking about for some time. Interesting, though, to note, Jason, when you were talking about the various factors, and I agree that the geopolitical landscape, whatever we want to call it, the state of the world right now is pushing some of this, and that's a very nice way, frankly, of just saying Donald Trump is a big force behind this. I hope that another factor in all of this is also the members of the Canadian Armed Forces themselves, right? Is any part of this discussion about the fact that people who are willing to put their lives on the line for this country deserve better than, subpar gear, broken equipment, salaries that are not necessarily commensurate to the things that we are asking them to do. The stories have gotten more and more embarrassing for the government over the course of the past few years. It's not clear to me to what extent that's actually an ingredient in this decision to really step up.
It has to be. It's also like Jenny Carignan, the
Chief of
Chief
the
of
Defense
Defense Staff, said it herself. They still have huge problems recruiting. And that's part of it, right? If you trying to sell a military, but then when you start scratching on the surface, you find out that, well, that tank is not that, it's not that good. Like, you can't really drive it that far because you don't have that part and you're limited to that speed. And playing the F-35, it's going to take a while. We don't have a place to park them. The boats, it's not quite floating. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's hard to
Can a boat
convince.
not quite float?
I don't know. Well, there's an issue with boats, obviously. So it doesn't make it sound. It's not a sexy pitch for someone that you're trying to bring in, right? And say, hey, come and join. And that's probably part of the calculation. I'm hoping it's part of the calculation. Make it look like something people are interested in and proud of joining. The king was in town, and I was reminded at some point of the military tradition in the UK and how everyone is so proud. My son was in the military and this, and I don't see pride put forward as a selling feature, as a selling point when you go there. And it's hard to be proud of something that's half functioning.
Well, and I think it's important to say in that regard, part of the reason that there has been trouble is because there have been questions about like sexual assault and harassment in the military.
The culture in the military,
yes. And I think that has detracted, again, if you're trying to make a choice about sending your son or daughter in the military, is this a place where you think they can thrive? And so there has been some work done to try to address that, and perhaps
Still
in
work
parallel,
to be done, but,
indeed,
yeah.
perhaps in parallel with this, it gets us to that place. I think that pride ebbs and flows. It sort of hurt my heart, as you were suggesting, that the culture's not the same here. But I think that has to be one of the factors, as well as actually having a functioning system. Because in some ways, we need the military more than ever now. Certainly in roles as there are conversations about, we have troops in Latvia, given what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, but also, frankly, like forest fires and whatnot. We're calling on the military more and more to do things in a domestic capacity that is not necessarily the reason we have the Canadian Armed Forces, but they are an important part of getting this country through the various challenges it's facing right now.
You were saying earlier, Catherine, that Trump is really driving so much of this. And rhetorically, yes, but he's also rhetorically driving trade wars, which nobody's buying into. The reason people bought into this one, the reason that other countries started following what Trump was asking on the 2% target, and the reason that Canada is ultimately doing it is because, to Carney's point, and it's cliche, but the world has changed. The last time Canada was at 2%, back in the 70s, 80s, there was a Cold War on. There was a real sense of threat. And now things have changed too. Forest fires are an excellent point that people are seeing reasons and cause to have military service people, and floods, of course, have been another big thing over the years, including here in Calgary more than 10 years ago. But also there is the sense of the sovereignty threat from the U.S., threats from Russia. The fact that Russia, the old Soviet Union that was requiring countries to up their military spending in the 70s or keep it high, is now an aggressor force. And so that is changing, and that has also been changing opinions. And the threat from China doing its foreign excursions in the South China Sea. And, so the world has changed, which has also put pressure to bear on Canada to rethink how little or how much it spends on defense.
Yeah. Question we brushed on earlier, but we didn't quite answer. Do we need to cut anything, or we just spend money and we print more money, or what do we cut? Do we need to cut anything?
Well, it's interesting. Mark Carney was asked about paying for this when he made the announcement. Why don't we listen to a bit of what he had to say and sort of try to parse that?
I just wanted to ask again on how this will be paid for. Are you looking at taxes or program cuts, additional debt?
So we one of the things we've said from the start in recent months is there's a few big decisions in the very near term for the government. Some of them don't cost or cost very little, which, for example, the one Canadian economy bill, which is now before the House, will have a huge impact in terms of growth in this economy and bringing the country together. Others have a more significant impact, and you just mentioned two. Today's announcement and this focus on meeting our our own responsibilities to protect Canadians, but also our NATO obligations at the same time. This decision that we're announcing today and the associated summit at NATO towards the end of this month, those are significant events from a budget perspective, and we wanted to get to a point where we had addressed those. And then secondly, as you just referenced, we have just begun the process to look for savings in government, to improve government productivity, to reallocate spending across government. We're just, last point, and so getting greater traction on that and clarity on the scale of that will be important for the budget.
Okay, so I'm not sure I understand what the answer is based on what we just heard there. I will say, my interpretation of what he is saying is that there's going to be economic growth because we're going to build all this infrastructure, and that's going to help fund this in the longer term. And I do think that's a big sort of flashing siren in all of this. Mm-hmm. Equipment, yes, it's a lot of money, but it's an outlay over a certain number of years. Things like increasing people's salaries, that is an ongoing cost that stays with Canada for years and years to come. That does help with actually, remaining at 2% or above and beyond. So that's why you get more revenue. That doesn't answer the question of where the cuts come from. Well, I do think he's going to have to make cuts somewhere in the government apparatus, but there's really a finite number of places between spending on defense, services to people, right? So whether it's like CPP or unemployment or whatever, there's really not as much space as you would think in the government budget to get billions of dollars.
No, and he wants to look at the civil service, but not cut deeply in civil service. Every time he gets asked a question, there's always a way around it, and it's how the economy will grow. We'll use AI. There's a limit to the number of billion that AI and economic growth can bring to the federal budget. So I don't know. I don't see an answer in there. I don't know if they have an answer, and for that, of course, we need a budget. I'm reminded that during the campaign, he brought up the idea of splitting the budget in two. So the operational on one side and the capital expenditure on the other side. I'm guessing that a lot of the stuff that he's announcing right now was going to end up in the capital expenditure side, and somehow the other side is going to be a little rosier and maybe a little
Nothing
easier
to see over here. Look
at the shiny stuff there. Yeah.
Look, guys, he's already done some pretty creative accounting. A lot of the way they're getting to the 2% target is just starting to count the Coast Guard, which is not a defense department, but the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. He's just bundling that into the defense target, which other countries do. So part of it is a creative accountant. Look, this is, as you guys were saying earlier, he is the economist. But again, I do wonder if that's even going to be a question at the end of the day, if we're just going to start becoming a more deficit-running country. Because you look at what the States does. When they talk about cutting for deficit, to cut their budget, they cut, but not military and not health and not social security. So if Canada does the same thing, we're going to have a real trouble with that really tiny bit of else doing it. Because you think about, when was the last time there was big budget cuts in the government? It was the 95 Paul Martin era.
It would be Paul Martin,
and what did they cut? And what did they cut? They cut military and health transfers. So I don't think we're going back there. This could be, like I said, the era of deficit spending.
You get a new tank. You get a new tank. Everybody gets a new tank.
I want a boat that doesn't half float.
And let's face it, because in other countries, like this isn't a debate. It's a bit of an arbitrary number. Do you spend as much as you're taking in? Yes, there are debt cost implications, but so many of these numbers are arbitrary. Like even this number that we had spent the whole show talking about, 2% of NATO target. That was, kind of a political target. It's big and easy and simple for us to talk about. It doesn't specify what they should all spend on. And here's a little secret: there is another way to get to that target without upping your defense spending. Shrink your economy.
Shrink the GDP.
Shoot yourself in the foot.
That's how Greece made it. That's how some countries did better on this during the pandemic when their economy shrunk. And hey, they're suddenly at 2%. So as we see this coming up to 3%, 4%, 5%, these are all politically set targets. One day pressure will maybe be brought to bear for us to pursue the next one. But right now, hey, we're going to stop talking about when we're going to hit 2% because I guess we're there.
I'd like to be in the room when an advisor comes up to Carney and said, "Sir, I think we should shrink the economy." Let's see where that goes.
And he was never heard from again. The only thing I'll say about the arbitrariness of the 2% is, sure, but Canada committed to it, right? 2014, Wales Declaration. All the NATO countries signed on. Canada said, we are going to do this in the next decade. We didn't. So I take your point about the arbitrariness of it. In a way, Mark Carney has made this point too. Justin Trudeau was trying to make this point. It's about what we do and less the number. But once you said you'll do the thing, you should live up to your word.
Do the thing.
Do the thing. And also your point about, soon or at some point we'll talk about higher targets. I mean, that NATO meeting is like, what, 2 weeks away
2 weeks
now?
away.
Yeah. It's
so that 2% is
life comes
already
at you
old.
fast. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, well, this was fun. Guys, I hope you enjoy your tanks as lovely parting gifts. Thank you so much for coming to this particular house party.
Are we
Very
military hawks now or not?
I think so.
We're still not
I feel
sure
like
if our
I
boats
know
float.
everything. Yeah.
Okay, that's it for House Party this week. Thanks to my co-hosts Jason Markusoff and Daniel Thibeault, and thanks to our excellent production team, Caitlin Crocker, Jennifer Chevalier, and Carla Hilton. Be sure to give us a follow in the podcast feed for The House so you can catch both House Party and my other show, The House, every week. That is 2 shows in one feed. The House will be with you on Saturday, and House Party will be back next Wednesday with another big, burning political question.